Well, here we are doing a little preseason scouting, early season, the summer months, and I do most all my scouting this time of year in the evening. Basically what I'm doing is I'm driving to the end of the farm, and we're going to be scouting basically the crop fields and the food sources. But I'm going to go down to the end of the farm, and I'm just going to kind of ease my way back up to the farmhouse, and we're going to stop in some of these different fields and basically just glass. We're just glassing deer. A couple of deer out in the hayfield right now, and it's hot, but they just cut this today, and I can smell that fresh alfalfa. Got to have that food. There's no acorns yet, and this is deer candy to them right now. We're out in an alfalfa field here, and it actually just goes and breaks up over the hill here. And there's usually deer on the other side, so I'm just going to kind of ease up to one of these hay bales, and I'm going to glass over the edge just to see what's out there. But as I get closer to season, now I'm looking for those bucks because their antler growth is pretty much completed, and at that point I can tell what bucks I have, and hopefully compare them to some of the trail cams that I had from last year, and I'm also paying attention at that point where they're coming to, where they're spending their time. That'll tell me where kind of the travel route of that deer. But right now these deer are just coming out in the evening to feed, and it's just a lot of fun to see them. One of the most important tools that I use this time of year for scouting, obviously, is a good pair of binoculars. So whatever you're using, make sure you have a good quality pair of binoculars when you're doing your early season scouting, because you're doing a lot of glassing in low light. See, they've got to have this new growth. These does, they have to have that new growth for lactating purposes. This alfalfa gives them a great supply of milk for those little ones. And know that in a few months I'll be in a tree stand waiting for them to come walking by. Hi, I'm Rick White with Alpen Optics, and I want to talk to you today about the new Alpen Shasta Ridge binoculars. Now, they're lighter than the older Shasta Ridges, new sleek design, fog-proof, waterproof, BAK4 prisms, phase-coated, and the lenses are multi-coated. Inexpensive pair of binoculars with great quality. So if you're looking to save a little money, but still put quality in your backpack, make sure you check out the Alpen Shasta Ridge binoculars. Well, I'm out doing a little bit of late evening scouting, just looking for deer and waiting for them to come out into the field. But I've got a new pair of Alpen Teton binoculars. A lot of times people will ask me, what binoculars are best in low light situations? Well, that's simple. The answer is the Alpen Teton binoculars. And the reason for that is they have the Abbey Koenig prism, which simply means it allows 94% of available light to get through these binoculars, making them an excellent pair of binoculars in low light. So if you're looking for a pair of binoculars that will see detail into a dark timber right now, this time of the evening, make sure you check out the Alpen Teton binoculars. You'll be glad you did. Oh, here's some deer coming out right now. Anyways, hey, I'm glad to be here. Rick White here, and I've got a guest that comes all the way from Vermont tonight, Mr. Brian Kasten and another great weekly special. So we'll be back right after this. Welcome back, everybody. Once again, another episode of On the Hunt with Alpen Optics, and I'm your host, Rick White. Man, I tell you what, I just love doing this show, and we've had some darn hot weather around here. I'd be interested to see how the weather is in your folks' world out there. But anyway, my guest this evening comes all the way from Vermont, Mr. Brian Kasten. Brian, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing quite well tonight, Rick. It's good to be here, and I hope I can give you some good stuff.
Oh, I'm pretty sure you will. And this is, I know, your first time on the show, so I'd like you just to take a few seconds and tell everybody just a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a redneck from Vermont via Pennsylvania. That's kind of where I grew up. I moved here about 25 years ago, and I just couldn't leave. It was just too beautiful. So, I worked professionally as a chef since 1980. So it was very easy for me to find work up here in the ski area. So that's kind of how I got here. And, I live the outdoor life. I mean, I have a bow in one hand and a fishing rod in the other. And, that's how things go for me.
Well, that's great. It's been a few years, but I've turkey hunted, not in Vermont, but up around that area, New Hampshire and New York and some of those areas. But you're absolutely right. It is absolutely beautiful country out there. Deer seasons, I don't know, when's your deer season start in Vermont? Pretty soon here?
We start October 1st for bow season, and rifle kicks in, at the end of the month. And then we have a later season for primitive weapons and another opening up for bow season. So, we get to hunt through the rut, but, we got to look for them here.
Well, yeah, that's, we'll talk a little bit about maybe some early season scouting and what you go through, but could you explain to the folks, because I know you've done a little hunting in the Midwest as well. And me living in Iowa, we're spoiled. We really are. And I know that when I've been up there turkey hunting and my buddies that I hunt with out there, I've got one friend in New Hampshire, and, he says he goes out deer hunting, sits in a stand, and maybe 10 sets, he might see a deer, maybe 3 of those sets. He doesn't even see deer some of the sets, and that's very unusual, at least for us down here. So maybe explain some of the differences.
Well, what we find up here is that you described it pretty accurately. I mean, you have to do a lot of good scouting to be able to figure out, what the deer are feeding on, where they're going, where they're coming from, where they're getting water. And what I tell people, you look at a little tiny deer trail that, you would never look at in the Midwest, and that's a main trail here. But when you go out to the Midwest, like Ohio and all that, I mean, you're looking at cow paths out there for figuring out where the deer are, passing through. Also, if you see a couple of dozen deer in a season in Vermont, you're usually having a pretty good season. We have big areas of land that, are kind of void of game. There's just nothing to hold them in an area. So they're pretty nomadic here, especially, following the food, and, their whole life revolves around their stomach. So
that in itself has to be really tough, from a hunter standpoint, because, I see that many deer in one set on a normal every day. So I would imagine that the preseason scouting that you do is probably very important to your success, once your season opens up.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I do a lot of long range scouting. Right now, I'm in long range scouting mode. Basically, we're watching field edges and stuff like that to try to figure out, what deer in certain areas. And I'm using my wings spotting scope to be able to really look out there a long ways from ridge top to ridge top sometimes. And, that makes a difference. I do a lot of stuff with, online stuff like Google Earth and stuff like that, where I actually take a look at certain areas that I want to look at for hunting. And then I take what I see in that and I kind of pare down my scouting and where I want to put my trail cams in accordance to that. With that, I'm making a map literally on a piece of paper so that I understand, where they're coming and going from, and also looking at, if they're feeding on oaks, and the acorns are dropping, I have those areas listed on the map, and I have a north-south orientation for all that. So I have an idea of what the prevailing winds are doing or on a certain day. So I understand how I have to get to that stand site without boogering up my hunt.
So are you allowed to hunt over bait in Vermont?
No, not anymore. They
Okay.
stopped that about 10 years ago. So
Okay.
you just have to use the natural stuff that's there.
Right. How's your mass crop this year? I mean, here in Iowa, we have a bumper crop of acorns coming on, and we haven't had that for a couple of years. What's it like there?
I think we're kind of in another cycle. I mean, we ended up having a really good oak mass crop last year. Beech nuts are kind of looking pretty nice this year, but we've had a lot of dry weather. And sometimes when, we get into these droughts, they just drop the fruit early and, the squirrels and chipmunks get them and the deer don't get after it. And, we have a number of bears up here too. So it's kind of fun when they're in the beech nuts because, you can hear them a long ways away shaking the trees.
Right. Now, do you have a bear season in Vermont as well?
Yeah, that starts September 1st, and that'll run right through our rifle season. So, and we have it actually split early and late season. Early season, you buy a special tag so that you can, hunt the first month of the season. But well, they got to make money somehow.
Right. Now, if a hunter wanted to say bow hunt deer and wanted to take a week off in Vermont, what, in your opinion, would be one of the best weeks to do that?
The last week of October is pretty good, and usually the week before that. A lot of people talk about the October lull. I've really done very well during that period of time because I actually scout all the way through the season, and being able to keep my maps together, I'm able to say, okay, are they feeding on blackberry leaves? Are they feeding on beech nuts? Are the maple leaves falling, and are they eating the maples? So, I've just learned that the lull is there, but it's only because they changed their pattern.
Right. Now, we have a pretty good October lull here in Iowa. And, for me, the best week here, it would be one of the first 2 weeks in November. But the end of October can be very good. And then around Thanksgiving can be very good. But if I was to pick a week, it would be one of the first 2 weeks here. But
for me, November has me going to the Midwest.
There you go. I want to give a little shout out. I do this now once in a while. I've got some folks that are watching tonight, John Dallas, and it looks like Becky Whitaker and Phil Smith and Steve Herndon. And there's a few others on here I've seen. And speaking of Steve, he's one of our fellow pro staffers, but he owns and operates Wobbler Creek Outfitters. So anybody that's watching wants to do one of those Midwest hunts, in Missouri, he's in Missouri, and you can buy your tag over the counter. So give Steve a call, Wobbler Creek Outfitters. But anyways, I understand that you are a professional chef. In fact, I know that you are. This is what you do for a living. So I want to pick your brain on, wild game, deer, turkey, whatever. Can you give us some tips on how to cook wild game the correct way, and maybe how not to cook it?
Yeah, my mother taught me how not to cook it, but that's a whole nother subject. I'm one who's very much of the belief that taking care of them from the moment that they hit the ground to the time they hit the table is kind of the most important. I mean, I love to make sure that, you know, I get to them as quickly as possible, getting the hide off them as quickly as you can to start letting that heat out. For me, I don't use a saw on my deer at all. I do everything with a knife. So I'm sectioning out the muscle groups. I find that while I'm doing that, I'm also removing all the fat in the silver skin, which, you know, makes it a very lean cut of meat at that point in time. So, you know, that any flavor you want to partake and put to it, it really takes it on very well. I'm not bashful with peppers and garlic and all that stuff. So I tell people just go for it. I mean, I like to cook the muscle groups in whole chunks so that you slice it like a roast. You know, whether it's a steak you're doing over an open fire, or if you're doing, you know, a slow roasted, hind quarter or something off to one side where you indirect cook it and you keep turning it to, you know, move the heat around on it. You know, those things are all important. One thing I tell people that's really important is sear the outside with high heat quickly. What that does is it traps the moisture inside the meat itself, and then make sure you give yourself 10 minutes or so to let it rest so that the juices go from the outside and come back into the center of the meat.
Okay, so do you have maybe a not too complicated recipe that you could share with us that some hunters may want to go out and try?
You know, what I really tell people is you can make up your own spice mixture, you know, from whatever you have in the cabinet, but there are a lot of good commercial brands out there, you know, like Rub My Butt and some of these others that you can use for, you know, barbecue competitions, but you can also use them on anything that you can do with red meat. You know, so all of that stuff makes a huge difference with, you know, bringing the flavor out. The only thing I'll tell you is try not to cook it beyond, you know, 120 to 130 degrees for an internal temperature. After that, it starts to get a little bit tougher and it starts to dry out the product. So
if you were to throw say a deer steak on the grill, and everybody has their way of grilling, but you know, on an average, you know, I guess it would depend on how thick the steak is, but on an average cut deer steak, you throw it on the grill. Maybe it's a back strap and it's an inch to an inch and a half thick. You throw it on the grill. Typically, how long per side? I mean, do you just kind of watch it, or do you have a little bit of a science behind it?
I have a little bit of science behind it. You're talking roughly 4 minutes per side as you roll it from side to side, and that'll give you so that you're still a little bit of red to pink in the middle. But again, like you said, it really depends on the thickness of it. Now, for me, I like to take the back strap, and once I take it off the deer, I actually cut it into 3 pieces. So that it's, 3 big chunks. So, and I'm cooking each of those chunks at a time so that, so that 3-inch diameter roll that you have of meat, you're cooking basically, 3 to 4 minutes on a side. And, then it all depends on, there are a lot of thermometers on the market that you can link up to your phone so that you can actually, see the temperature that's progressing with the meat. Or, I'm old school. I just kind of poke it with my finger, and I've been doing it so long I can tell what it is.
What do you say about the folks? Like my wife, she likes her steaks well done. Now I'm a medium rare on my steaks, but what do you tell the folks that just want their meat well done? Is there any way to have a quality tasting steak well done? I mean, is there a way to do it?
I think what you really need to do in that situation, and I have a daughter who eats nothing but well done meat. So what we end up doing is you cook yours, cut yours aside, and then with hers, just finish it, but finish it slowly. Don't keep it really on the intense heat, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to capture as much moisture inside the meat as you can. So you're looking at your thermometer and it's saying, 160, 170, 180, and then you just pull it off and call it good. But That's part of the reason why I became a chef, because my mother couldn't cook and she always made shoe leather out of the stuff. So,
Since we're talking about, cooking deer, I do want to share one of my favorite ways to do a roast. And you can tell me if this is what a lot of people do or not, but I love to take a roast and throw it in the crock pot and just slow cook it throughout the day. But what I do is I go ahead and I take my roast, usually off the the rear court, round, and I'll add a can of Pepsi. Okay, and I like Pepsi, and you can use Coke. I like the Pepsi better myself, but a can of Pepsi, and then I take a packet of Lipton onion soup mix, and I dump it on top, and then I just put my potatoes and my carrots in, put the lid on, I walk away. And then that evening it's done. And I'm telling you what, it is fabulous. And it's so easy to do. I mean, people that are working, before you go to work in the morning, throw it in there. And when you get home, it's done and ready to go. I mean, it's great too.
well, that's the beautiful thing about, stuff like Coke, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper, all that stuff. What it does is it has the acids that are in it that will literally take the paint off your car. So what it does is it gets in with the roast, in with the meat. And because of those acids in there, it breaks down the connective tissue, which makes it wicked tender. So when you're taking it out of the crock pot, it's practically falling apart. So, those are the beautiful things. The one thing I would do if I were you would be to kind of brown off the outsides before I put it into the crock pot. That'll actually add even more flavor to it. And then, it just lets all the other stuff do its thing and, and slowly cook that meat. Crock pots, those are beautiful things. I do the same thing with wild game meatballs, where literally I just kind of brown them up and then I put them in the crock pot with sausages and red sauce and turn it on, put the lid on it, and I go hunt for the day. And you have that waiting for you when you get back in. And there's nothing like having a good warm meal when you walk back through the door.
I've got to try that. Now, with my deer burger, and I've got my own grinder and I make my own salami and sausage and everything, but at least me personally, I like to add a third pork to my boned out deer when I grind it. Do you like pork? Do you like beef? Or do you just grind it plain? What?
I've actually started, and I just did it this past year with the bunch of deer that I shot this year, where I actually I'm grinding the meat through the first time through. And then some of it I add pork to it, but others that I add a little bit of beef to. It depends on what I'm looking to do with it. But what I find is that at that point in time, I start adding the seasoning, kind of like when you're making your sausages and your summer sausage and stuff, you add the seasoning in then. If you do that with your ground meat, you're able to really set a whole different flavor profile instead of just being ground venison. So that really adds to the flavor. I've done, Italian sausage mix. I actually I do a lot of Indian curries. So I started taking and I would sweat off some onions with some different curry spices and ginger and garlic. And then I'd run that through the grinder with the meat to actually make a pre-made ground meat ready to go for some of the Indian dishes that I do. So
that's great. And when I say a third, and that's just what I like of pork, if I've got 20 pounds of deer meat, I put 10 pounds of pork.
Yeah.
And people will say, well, that's not a third. Well, yeah, it is a third, because when you're done, you have 30 pounds and 10 pounds of pork. So it is a third. Yep. So that's how you figure it out real easy. You're going to grind 100 pounds of deer, just put 50 pounds of pork in it. But so we talked briefly, you brought up a few points, but I want to talk a little bit about from the field to the freezer. Now, you talked about getting the hide off, and yes, that's important. I know, you want to get that meat temperature down if you're going to hang it. And I want to get your opinion on that as well, but you want that meat temperature 45 degrees or cooler as quick as you can. But are you one to age deer, or you one of those I've done it both ways. I've aged it for a couple days, a week, but I've also cut it up the day I've shot it. And quite honestly, it's just fine. So what's your thoughts?
I'm one who believes if whatever you have time to do it. You'll find that the aging process does help start to break down some of the connective tissues, which tend to make maybe an older deer a little softer, which is, the enzymes start working. So that's kind of a good thing. But to be honest with you, I've shot deer in early October, or like when I've been in Pennsylvania hunting, that, I literally have to break them down because it's too hot and I don't have the cooler space or whatever to be able to bring it down to temperature. So, I don't think there's any right or wrong answer to that. It just depends on what you have for available space. Now, during rifle season here in Vermont, when I get lucky there, then I'll hang them for 3 or 4 days to kind of, help that, transition along. But really what you're doing is you're activating the, kind of the bacteria in them to actually start kind of breaking them down a little bit internally. So.
Yeah, I mean, people really have to know that if you're going to hang deer, the conditions have to be right, because you do not want to hang deer in warm temperatures. And,
oh, yeah.
Here in Iowa, if you're hunting during, say, shotgun season and you go hang your deer in about 3 hours, it's frozen solid. So, you got to think about that as well. And what is it actually doing for the meat, and then trying to thaw it out to cut it up, and how that goes. What other tips can you give us to make sure, you want to make sure your meat stays clean. I'm not one to spray the meat down unless you have to. What's your thoughts on that? You putting water on them?
To be honest with you, one of the first things I do when I get it back to the house is I actually flush them right out really good. Okay. For the meat, when I hang it, cheesecloth or, the game bags that you can get that lets a little bit of air through, they're worth their weight in gold, because depending on the time of the season, you got to deal with, if you have flies and stuff around. If it's warm enough so the flies are flying, I don't do much hanging with that. But I will put them into a cooler with ice in bags so that it doesn't leach through to the meat. That tends to, just do funky thing, makes the meat funky. So,
well, it can spread bacteria very quickly too.
Yep.
Because bacteria is going to start at some point. What other, we've got a few minutes here. What other tips, you mentioned, and I do the same thing. I used to years ago, but I don't saw, any bones anymore. I do it all with a knife. And I do cut all the silver skin and all the fat. Deer fat to me is rancid, and yep. it disflavors the meat for sure. I have so many people say, I don't like the taste of deer meat. And quite honestly, if it was probably taken care of and prepared right, it's really hard to notice the difference. It really is.
Without a doubt. It's so important to take those little steps. There are so many YouTube channels that you can watch, people on how they break down the animals, and even the books out there. The Meat Eater, he does a really good demonstration by numbers of different pictures of how he breaks his animals down step by step. I can't go beyond that because, they have it cold. So, one thing I'll tell people is make sure you have at least 2 really sharp knives. Take your time, because you don't have to be in a rush to do it. And, I vacuum seal everything. So, that's the other thing I do to ensure freshness. But I actually go one step further, where each different muscle group or steak that I've cut out, I actually wrap that in plastic wrap tight first, and then I vacuum seal it. And I just had some moose that we shot 4 or 5 years ago that was just like it was yesterday. So,
Yep, and that absolutely can be done. Now, I have to ask you this. Are you, me being a big turkey hunter, do you like a turkey hunt?
You got to drag my ass out of the turkey woods. I hunt turkeys in New Hampshire, Vermont, Pennsylvania, Ohio. So, turkey is my second language.
Yeah, no, me here. How was your turkey season this past spring?
Let's just say Vermont was a little slow because we had a weird spring. My Pennsylvania season, well, I was done in a half hour. And, my friends were kind of unhappy with the fact that I was done so quick, but what are you going to do? They were gobbling in my backyard.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And the turkey numbers, and I've mentioned this before, in a lot of the states I hunted this year, the numbers are down. And hopefully they'll bounce back. Here in Iowa, I've seen quite a few young turkeys this year. So I think the hatch was a pretty good hatch. And our numbers were down here in Iowa as well. However, we still had really good numbers, but we were down a little bit. But anyways,
Yeah.
listen, I'm going to put you on hold here for just a second. I'm going to go over our weekly special. Now, those of you that spend a little time on social media, you've probably seen one of our little ads floating around, the Alpen Apex scopes. There's $100 off coupon on those. And anything that you purchase over $100 is free shipping. So just if you're out looking around, take note of that. But anyway, hey, our weekly special is another, I say this every week. People are just going to think, oh, you just say the same thing every week, but it's another great special. And it's the Alpen Apex XP 10x42s. Now, these pair of binoculars, there's a lot of binoculars out there that sell for under $1,000 that claim they have ED glass. And in most cases, it's not true HD or ED glass. And very few under the $600 range. Okay, these binoculars sell for $450 normally. It is truly 100% absolute ED glass. You will not find a pair of binoculars this inexpensive with real ED glass in it. But anyways, we're going to run a special on these. $450 normal price, 50% off like we normally do, which brings them down to $225. That's model number 653. So once again, the Alpen Apex XP 10x42 binoculars, model number 653, normally $450, 50% off, brings them down to $225. And all you need to do is go to bresserusa.com or alpen.com. And when you go ahead and order this model number 653, just in the promo code, just type in "on the hunt" with no spacing, and you'll get the 50% off. I don't know what else to say about them. I've got a pair of them myself, and I really like them. They're in my pack. So a great special today again. So anyways, what do you have to say, Brian? Maybe you could wrap things up. Did we miss anything? Is there anything else?
Well, I think we covered pretty much everything we talked about doing. One of the things that I can tell people, don't be afraid to try something new. And it's only one meal out of the meals in your life. So if you mess it up, so what? On to the next one.
Well, we've got a couple of minutes. What do you consider new? I mean, everybody uses their favorite spices and barbecue sauce. I mean, that happens, but what's new? What's something different that they might try and maybe be surprised to find out it's pretty good?
Well, I would say, like when I was talking about, the ground meat and the meatballs and stuff like that, actually cooking your onions up with a certain flavor that you want to infuse into the meat for the meatballs or the sausages, that would be something new instead of just, throwing chopped onions up into your meatball mix and calling that good. Other things would be, trying, certain techniques. Like if you want to, if you shot one of the smaller deer, turn a whole shoulder into, a slow roast, like you were talking with your crock pot, set that up and do it low and slow over, everybody's got smokers nowadays. Put it in your smoker, slow cook it in your smoker to really impart even more flavor to it. So,
okay. Well, Brian sent us a recipe, and I think we'll probably end up getting it on the website at some point. And I'll bet you've got a good recipe for homemade barbecue sauce too. I would almost bet, but maybe you could share that with us sometime. But anyway, we're running close to the end here, and man, it was another fast half hour. Brian, I appreciate you joining us on the show, and we'll get you back again because I know we got a lot more to talk about, I'm sure. So
absolutely. Absolutely. I'm glad I can help.
Okay. Well, anyways, folks, I appreciate you coming along with us tonight. Take advantage of the special. It's a great special. It goes through Sunday at midnight, and make sure you check us out next week. Now, I'm going to be going fishing in Lake Erie, and Brian Belenovich, a good buddy of mine, is a know-it-all on food plots, and we're going to talk about food plots next week. So check us out next week, and for now, appreciate you coming along. Thanks for being here tonight.
All right, this time we're going to show you how to sight in the Alpen Apex scope. Now Ryan's got his AR-10 and he's got the Alpen Apex 4.5 by 27. Now he also has the sunshade and the honeycomb on it, and it comes with the scope. And what it does is it filters out all this sunlight that we're dealing with here today. So again, your gun would already be bore sighted like this one is. Take the first shot and then we'll show you how to make the adjustments after that shot. All right, so as I said, the next step was to bring the crosshairs down to the bullet. But before we do that, we're gonna take the caps off and we're gonna pull the turrets off, okay? And there's 3 set screws in there that we're gonna loosen up. We're gonna go ahead and make those adjustments, get everything sighted in, and when we finalize the sight in, we're gonna tighten those set screws, put the turret back so we have a 0 position on it, and then we'll put the caps back on and we're good to go. The next step now is Ryan's gonna hold the bullseye on the red dot, and I'm gonna make adjustments to bring the crosshairs down and over to the bullet. And that's what we're gonna do right now. Pretty close, aren't we?
Yeah, just hair
To the right. I gotta go to the left. It's gotta go left, right? Or not? Yeah, I got to go to the left. Are you on?
Yep.
Okay, so I think this is right.
Good.
And I got to go down just a little.
Yeah. Other way.
Other way.
Just the side of that red, but I pulled.
So we can pretty much assume that we're on, you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's in the red.
All right, that's all it takes. 3 shots and we're in the red.